superstitious. Writings on the wall. Very superstitious. Light is bound to fall. 13-month-old baby. Broke the looking glass. 7 years of bad luck. Good things in your past. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition and the way. Very superstitious. Wash your face and hands. Rid me of the problem. Do all that you can. Keep me entertaining. Hey. Keep me going stronger. 7 years of bad luck. Oh yeah. Good things in your past. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. Come on. Very superstitious. Nothing more to say. Very superstitious. Oh, the devil's on his way. So 13-month-old baby. Well, it broke the looking glass. 7 years of bad luck. Good things in your past. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition is the way. It ain't the way.
We're big, we're bad, we're back. I'm dressed sort of in black. Over here at La Barca with Nick. How the devil are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good.
Not dressed very black, but you know.
Well, we're sort of like a juxtaposition, I suppose. What do we have here? We have a Zen Quadro, I believe. I imagine that's how it's pronounced. This is Antelope Audio's new, I suppose, inexpensive on the cheaper side. It's one of their mini ones. Dun, dun, dun. Now, I think it comes with plugins, doesn't it?
I think it does. It comes with a suite of classic vintage emulations and guitar amps. I think one of the things they say about this is it's very low latency and you can track through the plugins.
We're thinking of doing a classic soul, funk, R&B kind of song. So with only, because it has 4 inputs, I believe, maybe we should throw up some sort of old mic pre's, compressor, EQ types and track through them.
Perfect.
That would be awesome. So on the front, we've got 2 XLR inputs and 2 guitar inputs. We've got 2 headphone outputs, which are completely independent. So you can have the engineer and artist mixes. Rather nice. On the back, we have, again, another pair of mic inputs, but this is now a line input, so you could plug a keyboard straight in. You've got monitor left and right, and you've got line out 1 and 2. SPDIF, so allowing another 2 inputs here. So far we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, of course, we flip over here and we've got 8 ins that you could have from the ADAT. So really comprehensive, so potential of 14 inputs. And as Nick was saying, this is a really interesting thing that you can run another interface simultaneously, which is pretty huge. And of course, that could also be used for an iPhone or an Android. I do believe that if you use an iPhone, an older version, not the latest and greatest, you have to get one of, Apple's softwares to make it work. That's the wonders of being an Apple person. They always make us do something. Anyway, there you go. Oh, front, we'll mess around with it, but obviously we've got gain selection there, headphone and monitor selection between the 2. And I don't know what this does. I'm assuming it's assignable.
This enigmatic Antelope button, yeah.
So we've got 4 mic pre's. You've got a way of getting in the front here, where you've also got guitar input and XLRs. We talked about that earlier, and then 2 more on the back. The thing about them is they have 130 dB of headroom, so schnizzle ton of dynamics, and obviously in the digital world, just ridiculously clean. They do sound great. I will say Antelope preamps, well, we talk about using them a lot. When we go and film courses with people, we always take the Antelope along. They're really, really small, portable, and great sounding units for that. In a bit, of course, we're going to talk about the real-time processing of the Synergy Core plugins. You'll see that in action. And of course, we're going to mix using the plugins as well. And they come with the unit. There's 37 included plugins. And I think probably the most interesting thing for guys like me is it has guitar amp plugins. Of course, there are analog emulations, impulse responses, EQs, compressors, you name it. Oh, and a really cool sounding delay. If you do happen to own one of the Antelope Audio Edge mics, there's also mic modeling built in as well when you buy this. And I will say one of the easier mixers to use as well. And that might sound a little petty, but when you're working with your DAW, which you probably know inside out, and you've got a third-party mixer which comes with an interface, it is nice if that mixer is easy to use. And I didn't have a problem making this work immediately without reading a manual, which of course, as you know, I rarely do. This is something we didn't get to test, and I wish we had more time, but it's the DC coupled inputs and outputs. So most of you are probably a little bit confused by that. Well, if you're old enough to remember, be honest. Do you remember before MIDI, we had this thing called control voltage? We had a CV gate that came with synthesizers, and that was the way that we used to sync all of our synths together. I mean, we're talking even in the 80s. I mean, MIDI came along and just kicked down all those doors. But yes, control voltage. So you can actually use it to control the synths at the same time. I wish we had, delved a little deeper on it, but we went guitar world because that's my world. Of course, goes without saying, it's 24-bit, 192 kilohertz. So, pretty much industry standard now to go up that high. I know about 5 or 10 years ago, that was a novelty, but now everything has to come with 192K. And one of the most important things to note is that the A to D and the D to A is exactly the same as in their most expensive product, the Galaxy. You get a lot of stuff packed in really cheaply, but you don't actually sacrifice any of the quality. There's a lot of competition in this area, and some of the inexpensive ones offer a great, great sound. But there is a clear difference when you get right to the top. Is it absolutely massive? No, but it's definitely an improvement. And you know, a couple of the units we've tested out that you can audibly hear that improvement. What they really are priding themselves on, and you can make up your own mind, is giving you that same super high quality, but a price much closer to the more budget orientated one. And don't get me wrong, it's not cheap, but it's certainly a great sounding unit and battles with some of the big boys, some of the more expensive units. And I suppose last but no means least, it's important to note there is 75 dB worth of gain on this, on the mic pre's. That's important if you've got some vintage equipment. If you buy something nice like this, it's very high quality, and you've got your nice vintage mic collection, which some of you might have. In fact, actually, it doesn't have to be that expensive. I mean, there's some really good, inexpensive used ribbon mics by companies that nobody's ever heard of. And you're going to need a schnizzle ton of gain. Most ribbon mics need a schnizzle ton of gain anyway, and that's why people invented these little boxes that give you a little bit more oomph. Well, with 75 dB of gain, you should be able to cope with pretty much any ribbon mic that's on the market and get it up. 70 dB of gain on an analog mic pre was an industry standard for years. You always judged it by, oh, does it have at least 70 dB? Hence Neve and stuff like that. So 75 dB of gain is really quite useful indeed. The other thing is, of course, you can use it as a standalone unit. So if you do want to just plug in your guitars and etc. in there, or more importantly, probably like an acoustic guitar mic and a vocal mic, and then go to your phone, you can do that. So it's incredibly flexible. It's a traditional, whatever that means, interface, but also it's so much more. So let's open up and do a mix using the Synergy Core plugins. Let's try them out and see how they sound. So we have a trusty guitar here, and all of the sounds we've been using, we're going to commit by going through plugins. Now, you can obviously put them on afterwards, but the biggest thing about this is being able to commit without having any noticeable latency. So at the moment, I've got a guitar amp on. As you can see, it's got all the usual accoutrements you would expect with a guitar amp. Got a 57, a Royal 121, not that they're probably called that, but you know, and it looks something quite martially. It's a volume, it's treble, middle bass, and presence. Yeah. Marshall cab, or something like it. It's a Greenback 412 cab, American 57, obviously a 57, and a California 121. Like you'd expect, we can blend between the two. Got the two different mics here. We can bring that one down if we like. So we're favoring the 121 more. Bring the 121 up a bit. Dark as you'd expect. Bring the 121 down, crank up the 57. I'm trying to give it some thwack because, you know, we're really trying to emulate a clavinet, so I don't want it to be smooth. It's got to be. So also you can tell I've got some effects on that. So guitar amp, guitar cab, and of course there is the Memory Man, which is called a Cat Brigade. I mean, there's the Copycat, there's the Memory Man. So I suppose Memory Cat Brigade is kind of a combo platter. Either way, it's pretty cool. Oh, we've got some modulation going on. Got chorus and vibrato. There's the vibrato. Nice. I won't be using it with the chorusing on, but there it is. So you get the idea. You can sit there, you can choose the microphones you want to use. So if I wanted to go here, I've got California 121, a 57, got an 87, I've got a 414 and a American 52, which of course would be a Beta 52, I suppose. Am I allowed to say all these things? I don't know, but we are. So you can choose what you want on that. The original combination is pretty perfect, but I'm going to put an 87 on just for schnitz and sniggles. Oh, I kind of like that. Maybe we'll go with the 87. Nice. With the guitar, with the bass, this is kind of easy to use. I don't really have an issue with just opening this up and picking some sounds straight off. Not really that complicated. It's a nice function, but I think the most important thing, and I'm sure you all agree, is this. There's no perceptible latency. Does it mean there's a couple of milliseconds of latency? Probably. Is it bothering me when I play fast? No. Now, many times I've used these kinds of things and have not been able to play. I've just had to print the DI and listen only to the DI. There's lots of, wasn't that long ago when you used to plug into the front of your unit and then just monitor the direct signal, which for me wasn't usually a problem because I just ended up using an amp. Now, of course, I don't need to do that. If I want to do work on in a hurry and, travel with this, which is quite likely, we travel a lot. So the way we've got this set up here, by the way, is we have a DI printing at exactly the same time that doesn't go through all the effects. That's useful, of course, because you could set up tons and tons of different sounds. I love printing DIs anyway because they're really useful when you come to edit. So knock yourself out. Print with effects, also print one clean as well. So I suppose, like any rock style mixer, I'm going to start off by listening to the drums. So here's the drums. One thing to note, probably the most important thing, is this is not cut to a click whatsoever. We threw up the original track and just roughly, the word roughly, played along with it. So it has all of those massive tempo fluctuations that were in the original Stevie Wonder song. To be honest, I have no problem with that. You will obviously download the tracks and do whatever you like with them. I would not say go out ahead and grid them, but if you want to do your own overdubs and do your own stuff, by all means do. This track was Stevie Wonder and Jeff Beck Had a Baby. A little bit of an exaggeration because none of us are Stevie Wonder and certainly I'm not Jeff Beck. But what we wanted to do is have a little bit of a rockiness from Jeff's version, so, guitar instead of clavinet, while still preserving the fact that Stevie Wonder's original is an absolute masterpiece. They're both masterpieces. Stevie was incredibly talented. So, once again, here is the drums. On the kick, and that was a D112, AKG D112, there is one gate going on that is not Antelope. So, sorry, Antelope. Here it is with it on. I prefer it off, so we took it off. The reason why I prefer it off is I actually like a little bit of that ambience that the kick mic is bringing in. In many situations when you've only got 2, 3 or 4 mics, and in this instance we only have 4 inputs on the Quadro, which is easily enough, obviously, to record drums. We've got some limitations, but I actually like the bleed of the other mics. In this situation, we've got a 545 on the snare, which is a very inexpensive, or at least it used to be a very inexpensive, Shure microphone. We've got the AKG D112, and, Jeff would have probably had mainly 2 mics on the kit up until later periods where he might have got into 3 or 4. And of course, when Glyn Johns was working on Let It Be, it would have been 3 microphones, admittedly all probably large diaphragm condensers. So limited amount of microphones, them all bleeding into each other is of a benefit. Particularly, of course, with the fact that the overheads are the hi-hat microphone, the cymbal microphones, and of course the tom microphones. Now, let's go through all of the EQ and compression. So on the kick, we have a little bit of compression. Now this is I suppose they call it the Comp 4K strip. So, and the colors, of course, leads you to believe that this is an SSL style compressor, expander. Quite nicely, actually, it's got the high and low pass filters on it as well. So the expander there, frankly, is doing enough. I don't know if we need that extra gate. So, and to be honest, that's how I mixed on my SSL 4K for 15 years. I always use the expander on the kick. So it's nice what's going on there. Plus, of course, there's a sort of 20 roll off, which is never really a problem. But when you come to mix it, you may or may not need it. You might want it, might not. Now, this is their Blonder Tongue EQ. And I know this EQ from, of course, Jack Joseph Puig. He used these all the time. And Joe Zook. Hi, Joe, if you're watching. And Joe is a big fan of these. I believe these were originally designed not for mixing, but for audio files or for radio station. They were just EQs for that. It's quite strange to work because there's no display. And I pushed up the 2.5K here. A little bit of 80 and the 40. Nick started this off and put a bit more 40 on it. So, but what I like about it, of course, is that there's already a 20 high pass going on here. So that's going into the Blonder Tongue and pushing the 40 and the 80, which I think is a very wide area around about 50 or 60 hertz, which we would normally associate with the low end of the kick. Okay, so if we move on to the snare, first things first, some transformer emulation, because we've got a preamp here, which is the BA31. Now, you may be aware that BAE work in conjunction with Antelope. So a lot of the EQs here are actually modeled on their EQs. And we've been fans of BAE. Well, I think I bought my first Brent Averial when he owned it for the first year or two. I bought that like 99 or 2000, and I bought some 1272 line amps. So I've been a big fan of their emulations of Knees for over 2 decades now. Anyway, this is obviously an emulation of one of their recreations, I should say. Off. It's adding level, transformer weight. That's what I hear. Level's going up, but there's a little tiny bit of transformer weight in there. That is very typical of using mic preamp emulations. Lots of people use it for that. If you're just trying to get a little bit more kind of, I don't want to say warmth, but you want to get a little bit more low end out of it and maybe round off a little tiny bit of a snappy transient and just push it back in lightly. Those are the two main things that happen when you put on a mic pre onto something. It's not going to be night and day like, oh my God, I've now taken the worst recorded sound ever and made it into a #1 hit record. No, but it is going to add a little bit more weight. I'd rather say weight than warmth. And it might just round off a little spiky digital transient. Not entirely either of those two things to the max, but just subtly bring it in. Next up, again, is the expander. Take it off. Rolling off to 120, I'm actually going to bring that down slightly, so to about 100. Expander is on so gently, and the compression is on so gently it's barely doing anything. But it's just ever so slightly. But the drums are going to a group, which we'll talk about in a second. Now the overheads, like I said, are the hi-hat, toms, and other snare and ambient mic. So if I go to a section like this, where Luca is playing a crazy little drum fill there. The toms are a little bit buried in there. Definitely if you go back and listen to sort of Beatles era recordings where they were doing, 1 overhead or 2 overhead mics, if it was Glyn, tended to, have lots of things going on, like tube mic pre's often, Fairchild or Altec compressors. And so what would happen is that cymbal, instead of going would be more like the initial attack, because once that Fairchild went pump like this, or that Altec went like that, everything kind of was being crushed that was being heard immediately. So you could get a bit more aggressive on this compression if you like, or you could use a de-esser or some saturation to try and cut out some of the highs and the high mids. Or frankly, you could just go into the files and boost up the toms. Just literally go in there and gain them up, whatever you want to do. But that's really up for you to sort of have some fun with. This is the bare bones drum sound. So the group on the drums, the tiniest amount of EQ going on here, like minimal. Ever so slightly brighter. Maybe we can back that off a little bit. It's in 2 dB bumps, so. I've got lo-fi here, if you flip over here on the cymbal group, and I've got the tiniest amount of saturation, 0.2. So it's getting rid of the tiny amount of high mids, and then got a little bit, maybe at 7K, we can bring that down a little bit. So a little bit of their emulation, which actually I like their emulation of a Pultec. It's not bad. Don't know how much saturation, how clean it is, and that's really the discussion with a lot of these plug-in emulations, is like how much is the digital, how much is just EQ being controlled digitally, and how much of it is actual emulation. And really the differential can be less about the EQ that's imparted and more about all of the other things, saturation, additional harmonics that are added. All I can say is like this one usually sounds pretty good to me, pretty easy to use and pretty quick to use. One of the things sometimes you can do as well is boost and attenuate at the same time, and it takes the cue and narrows it. So I'm going to bring this attenuation in just a little bit. Ever so slightly brings them in, only a slight amount. And then last but no means least, there is a little bit of compression going on. And this is, they're calling the Tube 176, which of course would be the precursor to the 1176. So all in all, some nice little things to play with on the drums. There is a little plate, by the way, on overall drum mix. So I can give you a before. That's where we started from. Again. And here's with everything on. It's obviously louder. It's a little bit more forward on the close mics, but at the same time, the addition of the plate. So on the drum bus, we have an EQ at 10K. And then we have a FET 78. I've always been a big fan of 1178s. When I was a kid, everybody hated them and thought they were the worst thing ever. And now, of course, people have suddenly realized, 1178s sound fantastic. And so this is an emulation on it. So here we go.
13 month old baby. The king of
it's just a little bit snappy. Just a little bit snappy. I don't know what it is. Like, it attacks slow enough to let the transient through. Works pretty darn good. And then the Lang, little bit of boost and cut. Bit of cut at 2.5, a little bit of boost at 7. But then here's the thing we really wanted to talk about was the tape emulation that they have. So here it is without. Now at 15 IPS, which is what it's set to, it's just a little tiny bit darker. Typically, 15 ips would give you like this little kind of low end bump. I've made many, many records where we would use 16 track 2-inch head stacks. So you'd have like a 2-inch head stack with only 16 tracks. So you got more low end, more print on it, but then you would run it at 15 ips. So it's just a little bit darker, great on drums. And being a little bit darker, it was also really smooth on the overheads. You know, sometimes people go down to, 7.5 ips, and of course it's inches per second. So at 30 ips, 30 inches per second, you get a lot more tape, so it's a little bit more high fidelity. At the half speed, you get a little bit more low bump going on and a little bit of roll off on the high end. So we would do things like record all of the drums and the bass at 15 ips, and then on a second machine, we would record all of the overdubs at 30. So we would like mix that down, dump it over, and then or sync the two together, which was always a complete nightmare. But we had this thing called Clasp, which was really popular about 15 years ago, where it would do automatic tape transfers straight into your DAW, straight into Pro Tools. So all the drums on the last Aerosmith record, for instance, and bass were all done on 2-inch, 15 ips, and then all the guitar overdubs and vocals were all done at 30 ips, 24 track. So an interesting thing. So you can play with that, just play with it yourself and see what you like. I'm sure somebody smarter than me can put this through and see what the EQ curve is changing, and it's probably just a little tiny low bump, tiny bit of rounding off on the high end, but it can be really dark. You can mess with this and you can get it pretty darn dark. But great plugin, fun to use, and really nice on the drums, especially, because we wanted the drums to be brighter. You want that snare to cut through. And the overheads are really contributing a lot to that because they're the overheads for the cymbals, the toms, and everything, and the hi-hat. So they're all being picked up. So you can't really just treat them for one thing because the toms are in there. You can't just, dull it down. Then when the tom's played, it's completely, you've got to have the bite, but the tape sort of rolls off a little bit of the spiky transients all over. So when we're recording the guitars, we use Antelope's own amp simulations. They have, as far as I'm concerned, 0 latency. I'm sure they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 milliseconds. Who the heck knows? However, I didn't hear anything. And I didn't have the DI up. The DI has come up later in the mix that we're about to show you. The other thing is the bass as well. We had it on the bass amp. We had an emulation to get the amp tones. So the reality is all of these fancy, analog emulations that you're going to see in the mix, you can print through all of those. So if you want to use some mic pre-sound of, say, the BAE Neve style 1073s and all that stuff. You want to use that. You want to use the LA2A. You want to use the Blonder, Tongue, EQ, whatever it might be, 1176s. You can do that on the way in, which is a big deal. Let's go to the bass. Now, the bass, we had an amp emulation on it when we were printing, and we printed a DI. So we printed through the amp emulation. So we've got two things going on. You've got the bass DI. Here it is. And here is the bass amp. Pretty easy to figure out which one's which, because there's more drive going on there. On the DI, there's the Lang emulation. Now, Lang is another Holtec style EQ. All that's happening here is there's a 2/5 cut, to be honest, really dramatically put up at maximum. I was going to say 10, there's no numbers, but at max. Now take it off. This is passive EQs, emulated passive EQs. So they're never going to do what would happen. If you went from 0 to 10 on a cut or a boost on any digital plugin, it would be, to this. It would you'd go from a cymbal to an underground thump. So it's quite subtle, but it does the job. On the amp, there is... There's a bit of 50 kind of bypass. We could go up a little higher maybe on the high pass. And let's hit that with the DI, and that might help the low end of the DI sing a bit more. It's interesting, it sounds best there. The phase relationship is the phase relationship. And so I remember actually working with Michael Brower on, I don't know what album it was. We did 4 albums together. He mixed of mine, one after the other. And it was one of the albums we were mixing together. He left to go and do something, and he said, hey, have a playback, make some notes. He said to me, if you think the snare is a little too full, because he was a little, I'm not sure if it's too full. He goes, just go to this sample. There was a multiple array of samples that were going along with the main snare. He goes, go to this one and just flip the polarity. And it will just cancel out a little tiny bit of the low end. And it was interesting, and I put it in, I was in and out, and it just took out a little tiny bit because it wasn't the whole signal. It was just like one element of it that just kind of like made it feel like the low end was being reduced. It was an interesting kind of philosophy. But that's often what happens with DIs and amps on the bass guitar, because you're going to go in there and they'll never, ever in a million years line up. Ever. Doesn't matter what the waveforms you think, you're never going to get the DI and the bass amp to look the same, whether it be inverted or identical. It's never going to happen. It's just what happens. So quite often you go in and go up to like 200 hertz and wipe it out completely from an amp and just use it for personality, for the fingers and the grit and all that stuff. And then I'll go to the DI and do the opposite. In this instance, it's a bit different because if I rely only on the bass DI, I'm sort of missing some of that, some of the low mids that are being added as there's some possible, phase cancellation. I'm going to crank it for my own good. Kind of like where it's going there. Also, it may be a little less funky, but it's a little bit more rock. And what we're trying to do is do this hybrid approach anyway. I actually like what's going on there, but it's not traditionally what I would do. Again, mix it the way you hear it. So this is the stay level, which is the gates. So after much deliberation, we realized that this is a Neumann-style EQ. And I don't know, I've just got to tell this story. So I was working with Bob Ludwig a million years ago on a big record. And so I flew out to work with him, arrived with the tapes. There was a combination of tapes and digital. And we went through every song and chose between the tape and the digital. So it was a song-by-song basis. And it was so much fun. And of course, he had mastered a lot of Zappa stuff. And he told me that he used these Neumann EQs on his mastering chain, a pair of them. And that Frank had given him notes of when to boost and cut stuff. Because Frank Zappa had this magical ears. And so he said Frank Zappa was lying on a couch in front of the speakers. And there was this one moment in the song where he had to boost a specific frequency, but also narrowed the Q. He said he came to the point to boost it, and he didn't narrow the Q, or didn't narrow it enough. So it was like boosting it, but it was just too aggressive because it was pulling up other frequencies. And he said, it was like a 7-minute Frank Zappa song, which most Frank Zappa songs were at least 7 minutes. And he said that Frank's lying on the couch, and then suddenly this arm just goes up like this. And he's like, how could he hear that? And of course, he stopped and he goes, you didn't narrow the Q enough, did you? So that's what I always remember, because he came running in with the original Neumann EQs and showed me the move and how difficult it was to do at that exact moment, and how Frank Zappa noticed it. But there you go. So on this, we've got a little bit of cutting going on. Subtle. There's a 20 hertz roll off there, but on the Lang, Yeah, I mean, it's got 20 hertz cutoff. On the bass amp, it's on 50. So between the two, there's probably a little bit of extra low-end rumble between that and the drums. If you want to get in there and make it super, super modern, you can. As you can see, everything here is very old emulations and trying to do less is more, not too surgical. All right, so next up would, of course, be the guitars. And we recorded with quite a gritty tone, but we also printed a DI. And then on the mix, Nick was saying the DI sounds more funky and more like a clavinet, which is true, because if you listen to the amps emulations on their own, just take a couple here. And you can mix this any way you like. But with just the amp emulations, it's just it doesn't quite bounce as much because even though it was only set to a crunch tone, not a full-blown metal, it's set to crunch, it doesn't quite have that spikiness. But of course, with the DIs, they are typically incredibly spiky on the transients. So each of them has, a little bit of work going on, 300, high passing going on there, but more importantly, some compression. Control the transients somewhat, allowing them to come through a little bit, but control them enough and just even out so that the DI, like the amp, is a little bit more consistent. Because the thing about DIs, of course, when you're printing uncompressed, is you can have that massive spiky transient and then barely anything afterwards. So you've got to get to a place where you can control the transient, let enough initial spike go through, initial attack go through, but then bring the rest of everything up. So that the actual sustain notes between the attack are audible. So let's bring in the DIs as well. And again, you can mix this any way you like. You can mix it with only DIs. A lot of the chic stuff was just plug the guitar straight into the console. And again, not cut to a click, not edited, just kind of... See, I hate using the word sloppy because it's such a negative thing, but the original Stevie version and even Jeff Beck's version, is just rock and roll or funky and just a little bit... I mean, Stevie's got, I can't remember, 8 clavinet parts? 7 clavinet parts going on all at once, some with delays on, all playing almost the same thing, but slightly different. So sort of went for that approach. There's 3 guitar parts playing the main riff and then 1 funky one. And the funky one's just playing a harmony to it, but as a chord. With that delay. So it's a similar approach to Stevie's, which is lots of things playing basically the same part with delays and just trying to make it feel loose rather than But again, hey, if you're a keyboard player, maybe put a clavinet down on it. And then as far as effects, the only thing that's going on is this Memory Man. So I've always loved the Memory Man pedal, to be honest. I think I've had one from Dave Jordan for a while. He left me his Memory Man pedal and I had it for about 3 or 4 years before he took it back, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful sounding pedal. It's nice, it blurs the edges really quite well. I mean, it sounds good with or without. Put it on in the whole mix. Baby, broke the looking glass. 7 years of bad luck. Good things here. It is interesting. It definitely blurs some of the transients. You might want to mess with your own ideas. In some ways, I like it when it's off and I like the spikiness. And then in other ways, I like it where there's a little bit of a blur and it means that the downbeats and the offbeats don't have to be like so perfect because they never were on either Stevie or Jeff's one. It swung, it had a groove. It was a little, I hate the word, I'm using it again, sloppy. But not, when I mean sloppy, I don't mean totally out of time. I just mean like kind of bouncy and just kind of pushing and pulling on the beat, which is what we tried to do here with no click. So when you are emailing me or messaging me down below saying, what's the BPM? My answer is, I don't know. And I can guarantee it starts off at 1, goes to another completely different tempo 2 bars later and finishes at something totally. It's going to be all over the place because it's cut with no click. This is something I'm really excited to talk about. This is one of our Produce Like a Pro Academy members. His name is Michael Garding. Michael is a world-class horn player, and you should hire him any time, day or night. He has done so many arrangements inside of our community on tracks that we've recorded and he's added stuff on, and worked with other people. A ridiculously talented guy and a complete sweetheart. It was finally an opportunity. We're like, wait there, let's use Michael on horns, because we have Luca here singing along with the horn part. In fact, actually, Luca did his part first, but it was great to have Michael do this. So sorry, Antelope, you don't yet have the reverb options that we wanted to use for this, so we did have to lean over and use Liquid Sonic's lustrous plates. We are fans of Liquid Sonics, and hopefully, Antelope, you're not going to be offended by us talking about. I know you're not. You don't give us any constraints at all when you send us gear to review, so, or in this instance, to play with and record with and without. Use to taste, whatever you like. And as far as like the group setting, BAE again, Mark Lothman's company, 70 hertz roll off, some 220 just for a bit of thickness, some 1.6 cut, which is not unusual. Typically, horns, over the years of recording horns, I've usually found between 1.5 and 2K, that area can be really abrasive. Going with a fixed EQ at 1.6 is a pretty good place to start. It's probably a little high to go to the 3.2. So a little cut in there. When you come to mix it, whatever EQ you use, you're going to find that 1.5 to 2K area can be really aggressive. Yeah, maybe up to 2.2 to be honest. But yeah, I know pretty much everybody that mixes horns will just tuck in that area. Quite often people use DSs with a wide band in that mid-range and just use dynamic EQ to cut it. And then, of course, Antelope's very own LA2A emulation. I feel like they've improved the release time a little bit. I don't know if anybody's reviewed this specifically, but the release time seems a lot quicker than any real hardware LA2A I've ever used. Yeah, it's definitely the transients are coming through kind of nicely. And you might say, what do you mean, Warren? Well, what usually happens with LA2As is the first transient comes through like this on a fast part. And then every transient after that, it's basically, it comes in, it compresses, and the release time is so slow that every single hit afterwards is compressed. Which is a little bit like we were talking about like with the Fairlight on overheads on drums with Jeff Emmerich, or the Altex. That was actually part of the beauty, because like cymbals, where they might be closer to the mic, tend to sound rather than they go, you just have this kind of like nicely controlled, cramped down sound, allowing all the toms to come in. So yeah, this is fun. So it's like a sort of improved with release time, etc. LA2A. But you might not like it. You might want the characteristics of an LA2A to have a much slower release. I personally like it. All right. Now, the horn vocal, this is Luca, the drummer, singing the part. Little bit of EQ. The deverb here, which is the stock Pro Tools reverb, because once again, we didn't have a lot of options on reverbs from Antelope, has a pre-delay of about 69 milliseconds. So it's like a delayed reverb, because it is. I like that. Again, nothing really crazy going on, just a bit of high-mid cuts. So what's interesting is the little high mid cut and the low cut actually seems to be helping in those mids, those, I suppose, somewhere between 400 and 600. And it's probably just a characteristic of the EQ. I'd love somebody to model, go back on and see what this is doing, see if there's just a relationship. Because I know with old analog EQs, quite often you boost and cut something and you think, well, it's going to boost this and cut that. Well, it does, but then it messes up and changes things in the middle. And, modern people would be like, oh no, that's terrible. But quite often we ended up liking EQs for that. The phase issues that might be happening were embraced. People were like, oh, I love this because it really pushes the low end. Yeah, because it was probably cutting a lot of low mids, because there was a phase cancellation going on. So I wonder, and I could be completely wrong, and I'm prepared to be, whether that's something that's going on, like cutting some areas is like changing the relationship a little bit between things. Either way, subtle work that seems to make a lot of difference, like a lot of difference. So last but not least is Becca Burn, the singer. There is 76 going on here.
13-month-old baby.
Followed by SSL Looking 4K strip.
13-month-old baby. Broke the looking glass.
An expander's not really doing a lot.
I superstition ain't the way. It ain't the way.
I think even with it out, let's have a listen here, take it off.
It ain't the way.
No, there's no real bleed of anything going in. So it's nice to have the expander on. I've used it on SSLs forever as a sort of precautionary thing. It seems to help things feel more forward and then, of course, cut stuff that doesn't want to be there. But yeah, all right. Next up is some 8K boost here with a wide-ish bandwidth, somewhere in the middle.
It ain't the way.
Back on.
It ain't the way.
Let's go back a bit.
When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you...
Yeah, it's just opening up the top in a really quite a nice way. So on the original Stevie Wonder vocal, it's double tracked. So this is the fake version of that, using a chorus subtly. Like really, it is subtle. If you take it off.
When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you...
Here's with it on.
When you believe in things that you don't understand, then...
It's at 28 out of 100. Let's crank it to 100.
When you believe in things that you don't understand.
Yeah, it's very subtle. That was at 100 maximum. I definitely like it. Just barely on.
When you believe.
It's got 2 voices. We could go there and go crazy and make 12 voices, 100. This would be hilarious.
When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer.
But a nice little plug-in to have. Choruses are notoriously bad to emulate, and there is very, very, I'll say very, 100 times implied, very few good-sounding plug-in choruses. Like barely any. Most people's chorus emulations I can't stand whatsoever. And it can get really, really harsh in the high mids. Don't know why. I tend to always try to figure out how to do it analog, but that's quite nice. It's quite sweet sounding. And then the only things that are really going on are, again, Memory Man and a little bit of extra EQ after the Memory Man.
When you believe in things that you don't understand.
And then we're sharing the horns reverb down here, like old school. I mean, this really is old school. It's like all using old-fashioned, styly EQs, nothing surgical anywhere on the track, zero surgical stuff going on. and yeah, sharing reverbs and delays. Old school like is as in I was doing it a few weeks ago on a console. You know, that was what you had. I mean, the first console I ever got was a Studio Master. I think it had 2 cents. It was like 2 cents, I can have a reverb and a delay. And then I remember getting, I think I had a soundtrack Topaz. Oh, and between that, there was another soundtrack that we had at our studio that had 4. I think at one stage I had 6 Sens, and it was like, wow, with 6 Sens, I could have a stereo headphone mix with maybe an additional one for the singer to get a bit more vocals. And then I could still have 3, things for effects, or when I was on mixdown, I could have 6. The point is like, we're in a luxurious place now where we can have infinite amounts of reverbs and delays and sends and everything. But there is a beauty in using only a handful of effects and then sending multiple things to it, because it glues everything together. On the mix bus here, we do have the Tube Child, which of course is a Fairchild.
13-month-old baby, folks looking glass.
It's really being used the only way you can use it for modern music, which is to make it the fastest release time with the time constraint on, and then just tapping it. I mean, that's what Fairchilds are designed to do, just be tapped. It's not a bad one at all. So, good little unit. 4 mics on the drum kit. Nothing fancy going on, no samples. Feel free to download the multi-track, add samples if you wish, but that is really, really basic. It's not a super modern, recording done with a kick that's completely deadened with a wooden beater. And yeah, it's a single mic on the kick, single mic on the snare, and a pair of overheads. We kept it pretty darn simple. We've had really good luck with Antelope over the years. We have one that we travel with. So when we go to other recording studios, it's quite often what we're using when we're doing courses and stuff like that as a capture. Between that and a couple of other companies, it gets used a lot. And Eric uses them on all the live streams. So when you see me do the live streams of mixing, which we need to do more of coming soon, that's also the Antelope. It seems to me that every interface has its pros and cons. I would say the pros with the Antelope are always the fact that the converters sound great. They do. They sound really good. Good converters, that never seems to be an issue with anybody. And then the addition of these plugins, I think, is really going to help. It's a good way to get in and get some old kind of emulation of plugins, even if you can argue about whether they're exactly the same as the Pultec. I don't know, I've got 6 Pultecs and they all sound slightly different. So, it's vintage equipment, emulating it is always going to have its own things. But the workflow on those kinds of vintage style plugins is always going to be easy. And it's more like a global, like, do you want it to be brighter? Do you want it to be darker? Do you want to cut some stuff here? It's not go in and do the surgical stuff. There's fancy plugins for that, as we know. And I'd rather do big stuff like this and then maybe use OX Sound Soothe 2 or something to control something, or some fancy dynamic, or multiband compressor here and there, but do most of the, the big stuff with older style EQs that I know and love. So many records we grew up on have the Neve style and Pultec style EQs, and the Lang, obviously, and the compressors like 1176s and LA2As. Those are the things that 90% of studios still have in their racks for a reason. They sound great, they do the job, and your ear is used to how they sound in a positive way. So thanks ever so much for watching. If you're a Produce Like a Pro Academy member, please download these multi-tracks and then do a mix, and we will mix critique them on Feedback Friday. Thanks everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios. Goodbye.